morning, third graders. It's Friday. Woohoo, it's the weekend. So we're going to take a look at working on taking some notes in our math composition notebooks. Yours could be blue. Some of you may have another color, but in Miss Badger's group, you have your math composition notebook. We are going to take a look at our table of contents. We actually already have this written down in our table of contents. It's talking about our standard, which is 3OA, which is operations and algebraic thinking. And we're going to be talking about properties of multiplication. Now, we already started talking about the commutative property or the order property. And so that's on page 6. So just to remind you, we've been taking notes. We have 2 pages of table of contents. We have a place value section. We have a rounding to the nearest 100 and 10. So this first part is rounding to the nearest 10, and the back is rounding to the nearest 100. This chart is to help you with your multiples of 10 and working with rounding. So you look for the number between which two tens or between which two hundreds. We have our multiplication anchor chart here. We also have on page 5, we have arrays. On the back of page 4, we have our multiplication. On 5, we have multiplication using arrays and how to use arrays to solve for multiplication. And here on page 6, we have properties of multiplication. Now, remember, our first property that we talked about was the order property. And in this case, we said I can use the order property to find the product of 2 whole numbers. Now, when we talked about the order property, we said we could switch the factors and our product would remain the same. We talked about how to show this using arrays. So we have 3 rows of 5 and 5 rows of 3. We're switching the rows and the columns when we turn that to on its side. And we can also show how it works with using repeated addition. And we can show that as proof or evidence. Now, the next property, and we're going to go to the back of this page. Make sure you are careful. Page 7 is your multiples of factors. So we're going to do that at a later time with 6s and 7s, probably after break. So we're going to talk about the break apart strategy. Again, this is 3OA.5, and we are going to write, I can break apart a factor as 2 addends. Okay, as 2 addends. Now remember what addends are. Addends are 2 numbers that when you add them together, you are going to take apart this factor as 2 addends, plural. Now, we call those addends the parts in this case, 2 parts. So when we take apart the first factor, we're taking apart the factor as 2 addends, and those would be our rows. If we take apart the second factor, which we would take it apart as 2 addends, then those would be the number in each row. So it depends on which factor you want to take apart, but we're only taking apart one of them. So, and we can also add multiply each part by the other factor.
That's spelled wrong. Just kidding.
No, it is not. Miss Badger's badgering me again today. So we are going to, by the other factor. Now, the other factor being, which one did we not break up? So if we broke up the first one, then we would multiply the first 2 parts by the other factor or the second factor. If we break up the second factor, we're going to use those and multiply it by the first factor. Okay? By the other factor to make smaller arrays, or actually it's two smaller arrays. Here, two smaller arrays. Now, what I mean by that is we have a multiplication sentence. Our first factor tells me my rows. I'm just going to write a 6 here. And my second factor, I'm going to use a multiplication symbol here. And my second factor tells me the number in each row or group. In this case, it's going to be rows because we're doing arrays. Now, if we were doing groups, which we could, we would say, okay, we have so many groups, being the groups, and we're breaking those up into two smaller groups. So we can break up, or we could take we have 4 in each row, and we have 6 rows. So it's a 6 by 4. So now I can just start filling in the number in each row here. And I have 6 rows with 4 in each row. Now, when I decide to break it up, I've decided that I'm going to break this up as 3 rows and 3 rows. So when I take these 3 rows and 3 rows, they're still going to add up to 6 total rows because I have 3 on the top and 3 below. Now, that tells me that I have my first factor here in the first multiplication sentence and the first factor here in the second multiplication sentence should each be how I broke up this first factor, which is my rows. These are still my rows. So I'm going to say 3 rows of 4, and I'm going to put a plus symbol here for the and, 3 rows of 4, or 3 groups of 4. So now I could say 3 groups of 4 and 3 groups of 4 is 12 here and 12 here. That's where I broke it up. So I'm just going to highlight these with my highlighter just to show you how that's going to look when we break up that first factor. The first factor is broken up, so the first factors here are going to be the break apart of this 6. Okay? And this is where I broke it apart, right here. So I'm going to highlight that just to bring my attention to it. Now, if I wanted to break up my second factor, oh, and I forgot to mention this is going to be a product of 24, because 12 and 12 is 24. Now, if I wanted to, let's take the same array, and again, it's going to be 6 rows. These are my rows. And my second factor is going to be my number in each row. Now, I can break apart my second factor, but that's going to change the number of objects I have in each row. So I'm just going to recopy the same array that I had here just to demonstrate for you what it looks like if we break up the second factor instead of the first factor. So now we're going to break up our second factor. Now I'm going to just demonstrate how you could break apart 4 as 2 and 2. You could break it apart as 1 and 3. So we could have 1 and 3, 2 and 2. Those are the couple that you could do thinking about it. So if I have 2 and 2, I'm going to take these 2 and multiply it by 6 rows. And these two objects are going to be in these 6 rows. And whenever I break them apart into 2 groups or 2 smaller parts, I have 6 rows still, but on the left side I have 6 rows of 2, and on the right side I have 6 rows of 2. So since this is my second factor is going to be 2 for the first array and 2 for the second array. So my 6 rows is staying 6. So I have 6 times 2 and 6 times 2. And I'm putting a plus symbol because I'm saying and we're putting them together once we've figured out what the 2 smaller parts are. So now I'm going to highlight my second factor because that is the second factor that we broke apart here with the 4. We're breaking up this 4 as 2 and 2. We broke up this 6 as 3 and 3. Okay? Now notice this time my line doesn't go across because I'm breaking up rows here, not the number in each row. Notice how it goes down this time instead of across. That's because I'm breaking up the number in each row. So 6 times 2 is 12. Just so happens that's 12. And 6 times 2 is 12. And when I add those together, and I guess I should have put a plus symbol here, that's going to give me 24. So my product for 6 times 4 is going to be 24. And you'll notice for 6 times 4 here, I just broke it up a little differently, still going to be 24. And so those are our notes for our distributive property. If you need to pause at any point, please go ahead and do so. That way you can rewind these and come back to them later if you need to. Or if I'm moving a little too fast, you can also see these. Have a great Friday, guys, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Bye.